Move on over to our next one here. And I'm going to go ahead and we're going to do our review on the Mobile Suit Gundam movie trilogy. Now, the movie trilogy is basically the original Mobile Suit Gundam series condensed down to 3 2-hour movies. So any and all filler is absolutely cut. It's the finest trimming I've ever seen in a compilation, basically. Several of the stories or plot lines are dropped or changed around, along with certain events that change or are even retold. There is introduction of new animation. By new animation, it's just animation at that time. I believe the movies came out 1981, if I remember correctly. A couple years after the original Gundam had finished airing and got canceled, got brought back due to reruns that skyrocketed the ratings. And Sunrise was like, "Oh man, we got something hot here. Let's take this, make it into a movie, throw it into the theaters, and repackage that with a bunch of product." By product, I'm talking about Gundam models. Let's see here. And alongside with the 3 movies, because of its cut down, its fine trimming, all the fat cut away, the story is told in a much tighter pace. It's in a much tighter movie and a much faster pace. Oddly enough, it's more coherent than the series too. That being said, for any newcomers that come to the stream / watch this video on YouTube too, I'll give you the gist of the story in case you missed it. So, in the year UC Century 0079, the Principality of Xi'an declare their independence from the Earth Federation and start a war with them. We follow Amuro Ray 9 months after the war has started, and more than half of the Earth's population decimated by this war, or not just Earth, but the entire human population decimated by this war. We follow Amuro Ray and several others as they are unwillingly dragged into this war when Xi'an soldiers attack their colony after they have found out that the Federation is working on a secret mobile suit on that colony, and a new battleship was docking into that colony. From there, we follow our mismatched crew as they go about the war trying to survive. That's basically what the story is. Things are going to kind of get edited. But so the 3 movies, the way that it's comprised or condensed down, so the first movie covers the first 20 or so episodes, from White Base arriving to Side 7 to Garma's death. The second movie, the first one doesn't actually have a name, it's just called Mobile Suit Gundam the movie. The second one is called Mobile Suit Gundam Soldiers of Sorrow, very poignant name too, covers from, where was it, right here, from White Base's involvement in Operation Odessa Day, and then the assault on Jaburo. And then the third movie, called Encounters in Space, starts off with White Base returning back to space, and then the Battle of Abaraku. So there are some pretty definitive differences, and it's kind of funny because I wanted to do this for such a long time. I've watched the original Gundam, and then I've watched the trilogy separately too. I've seen the original Gundam, like, this is now going 8th or 9th time. I've seen the movie trilogy about 4. This is about my 5th time now watching the movie trilogy, but I never got a good chance to actually sit not side by side, but like, watch one and then the other afterwards and do a nice little comparison between the two. I've read about the comparisons and I never really noticed it at times because, the time frames between when you watch a series and then a movie or just trying to like watch them, but they're like either years apart, like from months to years apart, you don't really notice the differences at times. It was nice to actually have that like side-by-side comparison. I could actually notice the differences. So I'm not going to list everything here, but I'm going to list some really key big ones that either it's going to be noticeable enough if you did the comparison watch, or you might not pick it on first viewing. So like one of the bigger ones too. So here's the list. The removal of the G armor and replacing it with the core booster. They also added on the White Base a second gun cannon instead of having the G armor. That's going to be relevant, especially during the Battle of Solomon, with the sacrifice of Slugger to stop Dolzel's Big Zam. I'm not sure how to enunciate that one. With the exception of Garma and Lala's death, which feels about the same length as it was in the series. Every other major and minor character's death throughout the entire series is minimal at best. It is negated so much so. Even certain deaths have been reshot or reanimated, such as the Black Tri-Stars. And that's dealing with the core boosters, for an example. Speaking of core boosters, new scenes were made for this movie specifically. It's very much of the same animation, so they were trying to keep it consistent. And the new animation really deals with like the core boosters being used, the second gun cannon. There was even some what was it? Oh yeah, the deaths of the Black Tri-Stars too. That was a whole new sequence of how they died. Well, with the exception of, I think it was like, there's Gia, Mash, and Ortega, and I keep mixing up with the exception of Gia's name. I always mix them up. One of them died the same way that they did in the series. The other two, completely new animation. And that was incorporating with the core booster. So that was actually kind of cool. Speaking of the newer animations too, the first movie had the least amount. The second one had quite a bit. And the third one featured the most. It's about like, I want to say like 7 minutes or so of new animation. So that gives you a context within a 2-hour time frame. Certain events between the original series and the trilogy were altered or changed around or retold. One of the biggest ones was that the White Base, when they were attacked by Amon, when she was trying to get revenge for Rumble Rawl's death, that happened at a much later time rather than right away in the series. In the series, it happened right after Rumble Rawl's death, which then allowed White Base to attend Operation Odessa and assist the Federation in Odessa Day. In the movies, after Rawl's death, Amon doesn't take her revenge until much later in the movie. Thus, the events that transpired right there, it's kind of like a what if, right? The events that transpired with Amon right there prevented White Base from attending Odessa Day and playing any major role during that fight. So that was pretty big because Odessa Day was one of the 3 major fights in the entire 1-year war. Amuro trilogy. Well, I mean, honestly, it is. That's another thing I didn't like about the trilogy too, was that it focused more so on specific characters. Now, the series, and what I liked about the series is that we had a well-rounded cast. Like, we had a lot of time with everybody. Yes, Amuro is the main character, and you could say the same thing with Char, but we get more time with everybody in the White Base crew. We get more time with a lot of the Xeon or Federation characters too, like Matilda or the Zabi family. But what we don't get in the movies is that most of the screen time, like the first movie, is mostly about Amuro. The second movie kind of follows Amuro, but more so with Bright, Mirai, and a little bit of Sayla right there. And then the third movie is a little bit more divorced from Amuro, where we focus more on Char, Lala, Sayla, and then a little bit more of a not so much as Bright and Mirai from what I remember. More Mirai based than anything else. The biggest difference between the movie and the series too, besides what I've already just mentioned, was the introduction of and the concept of new types at the very beginning rather than at the very end. Like I mentioned in the original Mobile Suit Gundam review, because of the cancellation was set forth, they were originally a 52 episode series cut down to a 43 episode series. They crammed in 5 episodes what they were trying to do with new types overall. And that changed the entire pacing of the entire series. Like, all the entire pacings up until the last few episodes was smooth. The last few episodes was like janky, chaotic, and just cramped in there, right? The movies changed that up. They introduced the concept. They don't even like allude to it like, oh, you might have precog. Are you a psychic? No, they cut all that out and they actually dropped in like, hey, you might be a new type. Oh man, new types. That's what Zeon Daikun was talking about. Oh man, new types are supposed to be the next step in human evolution. They start that right off the bat. They talk about that earlier on in the movies, and it's not just a streamline like that, right? No, it is a nice progression about this. So they get into the concepts about new types earlier on with the first movie, dive a little bit, like a lot more, not just a little bit, but a lot more in the second movie, and by the third movie, it hits full force. So when you get to that whole Cosmic Glow portion episode that was in the movie, it made a little bit more sense, besides it being an acid trip. Okay, so outside of those changes, right, there's some things I actually noticed more so with the movies that I liked a lot more than the series. Like, so one thing that was big for me was when watching the original series, I mentioned about like kind of like this G.I. Joe kind of fighting where sometimes you'll see like lasers and machine guns. That didn't make sense because when you look at the weapons that they shouldn't be functioning that way. The beam rifle fires a single shot and should be like firing a machine gun. And then, bazookas should be single shot too, not firing like multiple bazookas and so forth. Machine gun makes sense, right? Machine gun's a machine gun. It will fire multiple times. That being said, though, the movies paid a lot more attention to being more realistic. So sound was critical here. A lot of the mechanized sounds sounded more realistic than it did in the series. The gun firing or the weapons firing sounded more realistic. Artillery fired sound more like artillery fire than just like boom, 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 boom. It sounds like boom, boom. The beam rifle shots sound just like that. It makes it more iconic with the Gundam's beam rifle. Zaku machine guns sound amazing. The liftoffs or like the engine thrusts of the ships are amazing. Something that you didn't get in the series. It was more attention to the sound, a lot more of that finer detail that I really appreciated. It gave it more of that movie quality and realism to it. And that's what Gundam is. It's supposed to be real robot, not super robot, where you can have Gurren crazy, insane things happen and make no sense. No, everything here is grounded in its level of reality and its level of logic. And the movie shows it. Compared to the series, the movie really shows it. Another thing I really like is the soundtrack of the movies. Yes, it utilizes a lot of the soundtrack from the series itself too, but the movies also had some newer music composed for it. I believe the first movie had like Star Child as the name of the ending theme. The ending theme for Soldiers of Sorrow was Soldiers of Sorrow, which is a really good song. I actually enjoy it. And it's a pretty sad song when you actually read the lyrics to it. And then the third movie, Encounters, it's a touching song. I feel it kind of gets me like a little teary eyed because when you read the lyrics and then you think about it in the context of Amuro, Char, and Lala, it's sad. It's just sad. But the music is phenomenal when it came to the movies versus the series. I really did enjoy the music, and they did it very well. They timed the music. The series kind of overdone with a lot of the music. The movies did a great job of pinpointing where they should play, the series music alongside with the movie cinematic music, and it really, really goes well. For something that was in 1981, it's really impressive, especially for an anime movie. One thing I was talking about too earlier was that the alterations in, or not alterations, but the shortening of character deaths in here. I was really sad that when it came to Ryu's death, his entire death was shortened down dramatically. His screen time too was dropped down dramatically. In the series, it was more of a moralistic character. He gave morale to a lot of our featured characters, our support characters. He was everybody's backbone, basically. And when he died, we see the aftermath, how it impacts all of our characters right then and there, and as it still transits through the entire series. The movies took all of that away. The first movie downplayed him to just, I think he was a Master Sergeant, if I wasn't wrong here. They just downplayed him to just that role. When he died, everyone did cry and get sad, but it was more or less, we're sad that he and others died during Odessa Day. That was it. And everyone moved on. And I felt that was a real crime because in the original series, that was my foray of Game of Thrones-esque character dying. And seeing a major character, I consider Ryu as a major character. This is a dude that's in every single opening, every single closing theme of the entire series, as well as prominent as a character. His death was big, at least in my opinion. Some people might not feel that way, some other fans might not feel that way, but I felt that his death was very poignant. And for the movies to strip that away, it took away a lot of the character building for everybody on White Base. But I think it's more criminal because it took it away from Amuro. The movies, again, focus more so on Amuro, and his death being taken away stripped Amuro of his growth, that he blamed himself for not being more responsible about instead of being a whiny little teenager, being more responsible, and now because of what he did caused Ryu to die. Well, not really caused. Ryu chose the sacrifice, but Amuro could have prevented, or how he felt to prevent it, and that made him grow more as a character. And I felt like that robbed him in the movies. It was I didn't like that at all. So his death was far less impactful in the movies than it was in the series. But even though with that said, a lot of the fat was trimmed off from the movie. So like all the filler, all the junk episodes. I know like some people hated, like there's one episode, I think it was episode 13, Time Be Still, where Xeon soldiers planted bombs on the Gundam, and then it's Amuro and the crew trying to take off the bombs. Yeah, I'm glad that was gone too. That was kind of a fun episode a little bit, but I'm glad that was gone too. But a lot of the trimming of the fat condensed down this movie, and it was very more methodical, more thoroughly, tightly packed, and thoroughly paced. The series struggled trying to tell, like, oh yeah, the crew of the White Base is exhausted from all these continuous fights, and we kind of get this Mecha of the Week show where they're fighting throughout every single episode and all that jazz. We got the idea, and it kind of feels like they're all exhausted, but you don't really feel it. When you watch the movie, you can feel the exhaustion from the time that White Base lands and Zeon attacks Side 7, all the way with them trying to land down to Earth, and then going to Jaburo, and then going up into space. It has been continuous attacks, non-stop. You can not only see, but almost feel that exhaustion with the crew. Almost exhausting yourself as you're watching it, going, man, they are non-stop fighting, and you can understand the frustration that they have with each other, or the events that are going on, or what's going on in general about the war too. It's like, it made more sense. I felt that was well-paced, well-told story, rather than the series kind of drawn out fight and like, oh yeah, they're exhausted. And like, it didn't feel it. It wasn't consistent. And especially if you think about it back in the day, if you were watching it as a rerun, not as like, you know, watching it on YouTube or you watching it on DVD or Blu-ray like I did, you don't get that sense. It's going to be more episodic with that whole comic book feel of like, well, next week we'll find out more. That sort of too. Like, even though there's, as I mentioned, the condensing down of the series, we lose out a lot more on a lot of the other characters overall. But what we do get is that we get more finer concentration for certain characters. Again, like I mentioned, Amuro, Sayla, Char, Bright, Mirai, and Lala. So it was nice to have a finer focus, and that makes more sense in a movie context. What I want to talk about on the trilogy before I move on to Origin is if you are new to Gundam. So again, this is the little segment I have here, which is if you are new to Gundam, should I watch this first? Or in this case, like, should I watch the movies versus the series? No spoilers here, okay? So, to be honest, I'm a bit of both. And I rate the movies akin to how I rate the series. It really depends on your mood. Do you feel like watching a series or do you feel like watching a movie? Do you feel like watching something that has more character development and more elaborations on certain things? Or do you like something a little bit more tighter paced, more condensed, more straight to the point? You know, what do you have preference for? The only bigger differences between the two, between like, you know, certain scenes around it, just keep in mind that, you know, like certain events are flopped around in the movie versus the series. And it's kind of a fun watch if you think about it this way, because I always consider it's like a what if happened, and that's between the movie and the series. Personally, and my recommendation too, I prefer the movies versus the series, to be honest. As much as I love the series, I actually like the movies more because it's a lot more tighter paced, it's a lot more condensed, and it gets straight to the point about the themes and the story itself. There are certain things I am sad about that get cut out, like a lot of the other characters' movie time and the importance of certain characters. But I really like how they changed up certain things or incorporated or made things more streamlined, like the whole concept about new types and making that a gradual focus throughout the movies rather than this, hey, you get like about 30 plus episodes, everything seems fine, then all of a sudden it goes kind of crazy the last 5 episodes. You know, I prefer that in the sense with the movies versus the series. Not docking on the series. It's not that crazy as I'm exaggerating it to be, but it is actually still feasible. That being said, though, I really enjoyed the movies. Mobile Suit Gundam, the movie trilogy, gets a 4 out of 5. I mean, it's not much of a surprise. It's basically the movie series, so it's just the same. But I would recommend, like, if you're gonna start off in the Gundam series, if you're starting in the UC Century specifically too, the movies are nice. They're easy done. It's a 6 hour watch basically. I would say 6 hours and 30 minutes because each movie's like about 2 hours and like 5 minutes or so. So like it's a good compromise. Versus if you watch the series, you're gonna get like 16 hours plus. You got your filler and all that jazz like that. Even though it was facing cancellation, so you choose the way that you want to watch it. But I would recommend watching the trilogy over the series. A lot more cohesion behind that. But yeah, that's my thoughts on the trilogy here.